Welcome, welcome, welcome to Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Give it up. I'm Latasha Gillespie, and I am the head of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility for Amazon Studios, Prime Video, and IMDb. And I'm excited to welcome you to Voices, Asian and Pacific Islander representation in film and media. So Voices is the platform that we use to have conversations and build community around all things diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. And we use it to be a champion among the wider community and explore how we can all collectively make the entertainment industry more inclusive. Today, I want to welcome you as we are in the land of the Tongva, and which is home to the Gabrielino people, so we want to thank and acknowledge all of our Native American and indigenous communities. In a way, this Voices event is actually our anniversary. So we actually started Voices a year ago around Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we use it as a way to celebrate and amplify API voices in media and entertainment. And we specifically, last year, kicked this event off to countermeasure all of the anti-Asian racism and hate that we were seeing happening across the country. We all collectively, as we watched on our televisions and on our phones, we were stunned by the acts of violence, particularly those against the elders of the API community. And we knew coming together that we needed to uplift, support, and take care of each other. And so we covered important topics during that first Voices event around the media's complicity in anti-Asian racism, the missexualization of the API community on screen, and more importantly, how leaders can intentionally drive inclusion specifically with the API community and in television and film. But we didn't just do that, we celebrated. We celebrated all the beautiful art and the many contributions that made us a better humanity that were brought to us by folks from the API community. Our Voices event debuted created spaces that allowed us to share resources, learn best practices, and be co-conspirators, not just allies, but co-conspirators in this fight against anti-Asian racism. To think that we were all at home when we did this, remember that? How many of you zoomed out other than me? I was just telling somebody, I think I've used every corner in my house to tape a Zoom from. So I'm really glad to be in this room with you. But we were all in our homes when the programs first launched, and we continued this work over the course of a year. We had such strong reception after our API Voices event that we continued to do it to also amplify the voices of other historically marginalized communities. And so to be here today with you in person is encouraging. Can you just give it up for that? Up next, we will discuss the state of API representation in media and entertainment with Michelle Sughuira, Executive Director of the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment, also known as CAPE. CAPE is a nonprofit organization that creates systemic change in Hollywood. Michelle will be giving further insight into where we are in API representation in film and television. As we've heard time and time again, numbers don't lie. So listen up. As we learn more about how we are currently standing as a community in terms of API representation and what we all can do collectively to make it better. Grab your notebooks. Michelle, take it away.
Thank you so much, Latasha. Did you know that 80% of media consumed worldwide is made in the United States, according to the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media? That creates an incredible responsibility and opportunity for Hollywood to acknowledge its global influence on how cultures and communities are portrayed and perceived. That influence has only grown during the COVID-19 pandemic as content viewership exploded, largely on streaming services like Amazon Prime Video. Nielsen reports that an additional 14 billion minutes, which equates to over 26,000 years of content, were streamed during 2020, the first year of the pandemic. what we watch on our screens impacts the way we think, feel, and act. Media creates the narrative foundation for how Asians are perceived and treated in the real world, which is why this is not just a representation issue, but also a social justice issue. You'll be hearing from Kristian Schmidt about the Pacific Islander side of the AAPI acronym, and I'll be focusing on the Asian side. In 1976, researchers George Gerbner and Larry Gross coined the phrase symbolic annihilation to describe the effects of being erased in media. In essence, if people don't see themselves or those like them reflected in the fictional media they consume, they are deemed insignificant or unimportant in the real world. This quote from our friends at Harness summarizes the sentiment. Stereotypical portrayals of Asian American characters flood our screens again and again. These repeated reminders of dehumanizing stereotypes make it psychologically easier to hurt our communities. There is a reason this was a common tactic of wartime propaganda. When people see Asian Americans as being foreign, it creates an in-group, out-group mentality, making it easier to treat Asians in America with hostility and to engage in acts of violence and discrimination against us. As recently as 2019, roughly a quarter of the Asian and Pacific Islander characters in the most popular films that year died by the end of the film, all ending violently except for one. Unfortunately, not much has changed on that front since 1959, when legendary actress Anna May Wong famously lamented, "When I die, my epitaph should be, I died 1,000 deaths," referring to the tragic fate of many of the Asian characters she played in her film career. This devaluation of human life on screen translates directly to the way Asians in America are treated in real life. And this is why stereotypes are so harmful. Stereotypes of Asians have persisted throughout history, largely propagated by the media. For example, the model minority trope causes real-world harm, including in corporate America. According to the Harvard Business Review, Asians are the most likely to be hired, but the least likely to be promoted. Asians are seen as the hardworking and smart worker bees, but not as charismatic and effective leaders. Moreover, the hypersexualization of Asian women is one clear example of how Asian images in film and television have real-life consequences. The phrase, "me so horny, me love you long time," from Full Metal Jacket, a 1987 film by Stanley Kubrick, is still used to taunt Asian women today. And unfortunately, not much has improved in the past 30 years. Asian women continue to be hypersexualized on screen. In fact, a 2021 Gina Davis Institute research study that Kate partnered on found that female Asian and Pacific Islander characters are more likely than female characters of any other race to be objectified on screen. Now, the good news is that media representation continues to evolve, and you all have a huge hand in that because streaming platforms and social media have changed the game. Audiences are savvier than ever, and critical feedback is almost instantaneous. Here are some narrative and structural suggestions for continued forward movement. Changing the narrative can change the world. Start with who is telling the story. Writers are important because representation starts on the page. We need stories by us for everyone that tell universal narratives through specific lenses. We need more stories in any format or genre, centering Asian characters and experiences rather than merely making them the sidekick or the underdeveloped love interest. This must be done thoughtfully, though, with an eye towards seeding new stories and steering stories that may be overrepresented. For example, not all Vietnamese stories need to be about the Vietnam War or the trauma of being a refugee. Additionally, there should be more than the crazy rich Asian storyline, given that Asians have the largest wage disparity gap. That is not to say these stories are invalid or even inherently inauthentic. However, there is a danger of a single story becoming the only story, and it is important to see counter narratives as well. More stories need to show the breadth, depth, and nuance of our multi-ethnic, varied communities. Who gets to be the hero? Whose story are we telling? Is there a way to tell the story in a way that does not center a white male protagonist? We also need more intersectional and three-dimensional narratives. As racial demographics continue to shift America toward becoming majority-minority and identity conversations continue to evolve, Hollywood must catch up with more intersectional narratives. Currently, the image of Asian characters is predominantly young and largely male, straight, and able-bodied. We can combat this by telling more three-dimensional narratives that portray the humanity and diversity of our communities. Characters who are from multicultural backgrounds, multiracial backgrounds, who are neurodivergent, who have specific gender and sexual identities, who were raised in specific religious households, and many others. In addition to these narrative solutions, the following structural solutions can also make Hollywood more equitable and diverse. Emerging talent, including support staff, need to be paid a living wage. In a survey from the Pay Up Hollywood report, almost 80% of assistants reported making $50,000 or less. In Los Angeles County, $63,100 is considered low income. Moreover, 35% of survey respondents reported making less than $30,000 in 2020. In the casting process, producers and casting directors should also consider any unequal expectations from Asian actors that are not expected from white actors. Are they appropriately compensated for any additional work beyond acting? This includes foreign language proficiency or fluency, martial arts skills, support and resources for accent or language work, or work beyond the hired role. For instance, for the show Heroes, Masaoka reportedly translated his own lines into Japanese. Many actors also find themselves correcting a costume design or a prop on set. And while these are often spun as positive stories of collaboration, it begs the question, is the project benefiting from the actors' free labor? Another suggestion is to hire Asian talent behind the camera. Hire more Asian creators and executives at all levels and give them meaningful positions. Cape often gets asked to consult on projects much too late in the process, when few, if any, meaningful changes can be made. Asian writers should be hired from the beginning, not just at the end for an authenticity pass. Writers need to stop being hired merely to soy sauce or add cultural flavor to the script at the final polished stage. You can always train people to be better writers, but you can't replace their lived experience. Additionally, hire more Asian crew members and below-the-line talent. Sandra Oh shares a story about a time she had to tell the sound people on Killing Eve to stop layering in the sound of her character wearing shoes in the house. It's something you might not even think is important, but it is, because that's how we start building the nuance of a character. If we're missing shoes, what else are we missing? Asian representation in media has come a long way, but there is still more work to be done, particularly given the global reach of streamers like Amazon Prime Video. Will you join us in continuing to move the needle by implementing changes like these to craft a better world for tomorrow? It is now my pleasure to introduce Kristian Fanene Schmidt, who will talk about the Pacific Islander side of the AAPI acronym. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Talo falava and kia ora koutou. My name is Kristian Fanene Schmidt. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently dialing in from unceded Ohlone territory in the Bay Area. I was born and raised in Porirua, Aotearoa, otherwise known as New Zealand, while my parents hail from the islands of Samoa. As a queer Pacific Islander, it's always really important for me in my work as a writer, host, and consultant to push for visibility and equity for our most marginalized communities. During AAPI Heritage Month, sadly, Pacific Islanders are often an afterthought, or we're erased altogether. So many organizations and celebrations name us specifically and claim to uplift us, but instead we're left feeling deflated. So I really appreciate having this platform that centers a Pacific perspective because it's so common for API spaces to not highlight us at all. If you are holding an API event or you're an API organization that has no Pacific Islanders, it's not truly API, and it's actually okay to drop the PI from your name if we're not a priority. API or AAPI is a label that lumps two very different groups together, Asians and Pacific Islanders. Within Asian communities and within Pacific Islander communities, there's such a vast variety of experiences to cover that the API label is unhelpful and outdated in a lot of ways. It made sense back in the 1980s for the US Census when there were only 2 million Asians and a couple 100,000 Pacific Islanders in the US. Now we have 20 million Asians in the US and almost 2 million Pacific Islanders. So, if you do choose to keep the label, I really encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing? The purpose of the label was to promote solidarity. Is your work in alignment with that? What are your plans to center Pacific Islanders? Because we do exist and we are here. All right. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Pacific Islander representation in film and television. I want to look back at its history, where we currently are, and where I'd like to see it go. But before I do that, I think it's really important to define what constitutes a Pacific Islander. The Pacific Islands are made up of 3 island groups: Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. Therefore, you are a Pacific Islander if you're a descendant of someone from these islands. And by that, I mean you're indigenous to them. Because as I like to always say, I ain't Drew Barrymore and this ain't 50 First Dates. The majority of Pacific Island representation in the US, as far as TV and film is concerned, it's predominantly Hawaiian Samoan, which are only 2 nations of Polynesia. Polynesia being only one of the island groups I mentioned. We're more than 20 nations with over 1,000 languages. I can't really cover all the differences between our islands in this segment, so I implore you to get online and have a peruse to see how diverse we actually are. Now, looking back at our representation in Hollywood, it starts with films like 1953's Return to Paradise, set in Samoa, 1961's Blue Hawaii, and 1966's Hawaii. Each of these stories are set in the Pacific, but they put white characters at the forefront, and they just leave us kind of serving as plot devices. For me, Pacifica content is more than just having our islands featured as a backdrop and using our people as props. And Hollywood has a long history of relegating us to the background. Decades later, this approach hasn't changed much. Look at 2008's Forgetting Sarah Marshall, 2015's Aloha, and a string of recent TV series like Dugi Kamehaloa MD, which gives its titular character a Kanaka Maoli name, yet the actor has no native Hawaiian ancestry. That's erasure. When you think about how Hawaii is illegally occupied, these stories all feed into the narrative that undermine the connection between native Hawaiians and their homeland. Today, we're starting to see more Pacific Island actors star as leads, but even then, Pacifica content is more than just having a Pacific Islander as a main character. It's about us having real input in the final cut of a project, whether it be as a writer, a director, a producer, an executive, or a consultant. Our narratives don't necessarily have to revolve around our identities and cultural practices, but the storylines should feel authentic to our realities, even in predominantly white spaces. Unfortunately, one of the biggest tropes we're seeing as Pacifica people is us being positioned as a warrior race, our men in particular, whether it's as a bloodthirsty beast in battle or a brutish wrestler in the ring or a ferocious linebacker on the football field. There's a distinctive element of savagery that white people just absolutely love. And sadly, as Pacific Islanders, a lot of us have bought into it. Like many marginalized communities, we can often be just grateful to see ourselves on TV and give it a pass. People love to say representation matters, but not all representation is good representation, right? The whole warrior stereotype is actually dehumanizing and feeds into this old insidious myth that our men are more wild and aggressive and therefore dangerous and in need of policing. It's critical for us to collectively speak out against these stereotypes and misrepresentations and to demand more. Not only can we demand more and shape and create our own narratives, we can support those who are getting it right. Independent and international films are doing the best job at showing Pacifica storytelling at its richest. We're starting to see a new wave of filmmakers emerging out of Hawaii and Aotearoa who want to show us in our fullness. These trailblazers are setting the example and raising expectations of who we are and what we deserve. 3 films that are available on Amazon Prime that I want to highlight are Vai, Kumuhina, and The Orator. So first up, Vai. It's produced by Kerry Walker and Kyle McNaughton, and it showcases the amazing work of 9 Pacifica women directors, and it really shows the power, beauty, and resilience of our women. And what I love most about it is we finally get to see darker skinned Pacifica mothers, grandmas, sisters, and daughters, which has been such a rarity due to anti Blackness that erases Black Pacific Islanders from Pacifica discourse. The second film I mentioned was Kumuhina, and it's about activist and filmmaker Hinale Moana Wankalu, and she's a native Hawaiian mahu, and that means a person of third gender in Hawaiian culture with cultural and spiritual powers. And in this documentary, we see her fighting for her people while staying true to who she is in a world that's demonized her. And lastly, The Orator, or in Samoan we say Ole Tulafale. This is Samoa's first feature film that was written and directed by a Samoan, shot entirely in Samoa, in the Samoan language with an all Samoan cast. Whew, okay. It's about a Taro farmer named Saili, who faces constant ridicule and rejection in his village for being a little person. And when his family and land comes under threat, Saili is the only one left to defend them. So, this is what I envision when I think of Pacifica representation, and it's really exciting to watch it all unfold. Unfortunately, Pacifica titles are often inaccessible due to lack of support from distributors and studios. So, on that note, I really want to make a call to action for everyone to prioritize our stories and invest in Pacifica filmmakers because they are here. Pick up films like Christopher Kahunahana's Waikiki. Go to picom.org and check out Pacific Islanders and Communications because they have a catalog of a bunch of different Pacifica films. These are all fine examples of Pacifica content that's elevating and pushing us all forward, but they're not being amplified the same way these problematic depictions are. So I'm going to finish by saying representation matters when it gives nuance, depth, and strength to our visibility and voices. It matters when it helps us as a people see ourselves as more complex, more expansive, more colorful, and far greater than the small, limiting ideas of outsiders. Again, it's a really exciting time for Pacifica filmmakers and audiences, and I'm looking forward to what's to come as we continue to honor the intricacy of our identities and find representation that truly reflects us. Thank you for listening, and whakawhai lava mole ava noa. Now I'll hand it back to Latasha.
Today, we know in this country there's 22.9 million Asian Americans and 1.6 million Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, according to the US Census. And from the start of the pandemic through probably the end of last year, we saw almost 11,000 hate incidents against API citizens that were self-reported. So that's not even included the ones that weren't reported, right? By the end of March 22, reports were showing that there was an increase from 1 in 8 to 1 in every 6 Asian American adults experiencing a hate crime or incident in the past year. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. With this 1-year anniversary, we know that anti-Asian racism has not been eradicated from Hollywood and hasn't been eradicated from real life. We absolutely denounce every single act of racism and hatred, and we actively choose today to celebrate the creativity, the brilliance, and the contributions of the innovators, the change makers, and creators telling stories that have gone untold, that are shaping not only the future of Hollywood, but how we see each other every day. And we have one of the baddest ones in the house ever to do it, Ms. Jenny Han. And Jenny is just a wave, just a sample of the wave of talent that we've all benefited from coming from the Asian and Pacific Islander community, particularly in television and film. And this glass ceiling now has several cracks, thanks to the API directors, producers, creators, writers, actors, and we're so excited. We celebrate folks like Chloe Zhao, a Chinese filmmaker who became the first non-white woman to win an Academy Award for Best Director for Nomadland. Give it up. And because, women, we don't just do one job. She did that while directing Marvel's Eternal in the same year. Right. And we also celebrate Marvel's first Asian-led superhero, Shang-Chi, which debuted in the fall, right? How many of you? Yeah. We also celebrate the most talked about film of 2021, Minari, which catapulted the Korean-American story And Stephen Yoon to the forefront of the award season. We love Stephen. He's a part of the Amazon family as well. That film won 6 Academy Award the film got 6 Academy Award nominations. That's incredible. But today, somebody look at your neighbor and say, but today. But today, we are excited to have the #1 New York Times best-selling author, Jenny Han, in the building. Jenny's work on a 3-part film series, To All the Boys, a follow-up to her novel, created a franchise that birthed a new category in the rom-com space. Now, you know you a bad chick when you create a whole new genre, right? So, I'm saying. So, her upcoming Prime Video series, The Summer I Turned Pretty, which I cannot wait for all of you to see, is a multi-generational coming-of-age drama that's guaranteed to further cement her legacy in the entertainment industry. I'm so pleased she's a part of our family. I'm so grateful and honored that she allowed us to partner with her to be the platform that brings this story to the world and to all of your homes. So it's now time for me to sit down and you to hear more about Jenny and her journey, and I'm excited to introduce the dynamic Dino-Ray Ramos, or R. You know. Now think about that. Oprah goes by one name, he just goes by one letter. Right? So Dino's the founder and editor of the Diaspora Times, where his reporting centers around inclusion, diversity, and representation in TV and film. And he's gonna sit down and have an amazing discussion with Jenny, talking about the evolution of her career, the importance of representation in the entertainment industry, and what it means to tell stories in a post-COVID era, which is no small feat. So, without further ado, please welcome Dino and Jenny.
Excited. Look at these flowers.
Beautiful flowers.
We're here with flowers, and they're real. They're real, y'all. Jenny, as we've heard, you have like such a storied career, and you've started a whole genre. You also recently signed an overall television deal with Amazon Studios. Under your production banner. She's got a production banner, huh? Called Jenny Kissed Me.
That's right.
And also you're the creator and executive producer of The Summer I Turned Pretty. And for real, it's such a fun show. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I think at first I just want to start off by asking, at what point did you decide to turn your love of writing into a profession, especially in an Asian family?
Well, I should say, I've been writing stories my whole life.
Yeah.
But I grew up in a suburb of Richmond, Virginia, and I didn't grow up seeing any authors. This is kind of, at that time, book tours and all that weren't quite as ubiquitous as they are now. Mm-hmm. And so I never saw anybody who looked like me. And I loved Judy Blume and Lois Lowry and all the Babysitter's Club, all these books. But it was always an older white woman who was an author, and I just didn't even consider that I could ever be an author, honestly, because I just hadn't seen it. And so it wasn't until, in high school I used to write my own stories, and it would be all me and my friends, our adventures.
Oh, sure. So they were based on true stories?
No, it would be like...
so your own version is the Babysitter?
No, it would be it was almost like my fan fiction of my life. It was
okay. So fan fiction
we're on
of your own
trip
life.
10 years in the future.
Oh, that's fun though.
It was like that kind of thing.
That's fun.
And then I went to college, and I took a class called Writing for Children, mm-hmm. and that was senior year, and I don't know, I started writing my first book in that class. Mm-hmm. So then from there, it was this is what I want to do, but when I graduated, I applied for a bunch of publishing jobs, because I thought I could be an editor also. I thought I had a lot of different paths I thought I could take and be happy to take. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to be in the world of storytelling. So it was I could be an editor, I could be a librarian, I could be an author, and I applied to a bunch of different grad programs. But I really wanted to move to New York and get my MFA in creative writing. Mm-hmm. So that was my first choice. That's what I did. Mm-hmm. And then when I was there, I sold my first book when I was still in the program. So I've been writing stories for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah, I was only 23 at the time.
And you just got a book deal out of college.
Well, I just get,
It's that easy, y'all.
I was grinding I was on the grind.
No, yeah, of course. You were
but
working hard.
I was working hard, and at the time, there really wasn't. Still, there weren't a lot of Asian writers within the children's book field. There were only like a couple that I could ever think of. And so I remember when Shug, which was my first book, when I was like, I really want my picture on the back flap, and it really kind of wasn't the trend. It was like, especially for middle grade books, authors didn't put their photo, or YA books. It was really more of an adult author thing, like Danielle Steele would be on the back, or like Stephen King
Danielle
would be on the
Steele.
back, you know, but it wasn't in the
Yeah, in the
kids book world. But I remember emailing my publisher and saying it's really important to me because I feel like that would be the first time a lot of people will see that face. Not only an Asian woman, but also someone really young. So my first photo is like me in a typewriter doing this.
Totally candid.
Like that. And I wanted people to see it.
That's
I think
actually
if
special,
you can see
yeah.
it, then you were like, that could be possible. And so so they were like, all right. So we did it. And
Now you're here.
now I'm here.
Show running a whole show.
Show running a show, but you know, I've written like a lot of books. Have been sort of building my career as a storyteller for a long time before I started doing this.
Well, you mentioned, you got your start in publishing and then made that transition into film and TV. And, when you look back on your career, what were some pivotal moments that gave you that confidence to be a successful writer, to create a film, and run a show?
Well, I think that as an author, it's a very different business than being in film and TV, because it's quite solitary. First of all, you're sort of your own, like, you are the producer, you are the director, you're the casting director, you do production designer, you do everything as you were creating your book. And I've always seen being an author as like being the CEO of your own business, because there's just not much money to promote or do the marketing stuff. Like it's kind of on you to make it happen for yourself. So like the margins are much smaller, the money is smaller. Like publishing, in many ways, is like sort of a genteel business, I think, with a lot of really lovely people. I really love that world. That's my people.
Yeah.
But
And then you came to Hollywood. And that was just like, well, nuh-uh. Not so fast. No, I'm just joking.
I love this world too, but like that's where I come from.
Yeah.
And so I think I've always approached being an author as a business, because you have to promote like online. You have to do all that for yourself. I mean, you have support from your publisher, but I think, and my publisher has always been super supportive of me. But I've been with them for like, let's see, the first book came out in 2006. I've been with them for a really long time, so we've built that relationship, and I've built a relationship with my audience too, to where there's like some trust there. But it is, I think it gave me, I don't know, a really good foundation as an author to be able to come and do this. I think the biggest difference though is, again, it is so solitary, and you just you writing your book, and then your editor gives you some notes and you can take them or not take them. But I think, but like this industry is so much more collaborative, a lot more voices, and much more of like a team, which I enjoy being on a team.
Good. Yeah, so with the incredible success of To All the Boys I've Loved Before, I'm sure everyone here has seen it. If you haven't, I don't. And now The Summer I Turned Pretty. This is going to be the summer where everyone turns pretty because of this. Because of The Summer I Turned Pretty book trilogy, is there a certain amount of pressure with each project to do better than the last one?
Part of why I was so excited to come to Amazon was it really feels like they're building up a whole like teen space, and it's kind of cool to be a part of something like in the beginning, and like to be an early voice in that room, So for me, it's not about trying to top what I did before, but it's more about, I think, creating like new space and being like collaborative in that space. And yeah, I mean, wait, what was your question again?
No, you're,
Am I answering it?
we were talking about your one project being better than the last. Is there a pressure? Do you?
Yes,
Because
I
like
think
you said,
I'm competitive with myself.
Yeah, you're competitive.
I do.
with yourself,
I am that way. But I think it's really different too. This is I don't know. I just more than anything else, I think for this series, because it came out like 13 years ago, and these readers have been with these characters for so long. and there's so much like warmth and like love from that readership that I just want them to be happy and to feel like, I don't know, like they've been waiting a really long time. So
Who's been waiting for this series? Who's read? Oh, look, she raised her hand fast. She was all, I'm here.
That's my feeling.
This show's for you only.
That's my, so beyond like how many people will watch it or whatever, I think my first, I just hope that original readership feels like happy and satisfied and like, you know, like here's my like gift to you. And I hope you like it. Is that's where my head is.
Well, it's a good gift. I think people are gonna love it. You know, and also, you know, your success has proven that Asian-centered stories. I mean, we were just talking about this earlier. Like I was watching The Summer I Turned Pretty. I never had like a house, beach house, or anything, but I think it's more of the vibe of that summer vibe where you hang out with your friends and then you reach that certain age and you're like, you see someone you might like, you know, that kind of stuff. But how satisfying has creating these Asian-centered stories as Universal been for you as a creator, and what has that meant to your community, or to our community, I guess?
I mean,
say, yeah.
it's very satisfying. I think that's sort of the biggest gift out of all of it is, you know, to feel like you can show people that there is like value in many kinds of stories, and it's not just one kind of story, and there's so many different ways to be like an all-American girl, and what does that look like? And you know, I was at an event a couple days ago, and I met Michelle Kwan, and it was like so cool because you know Michelle Kwan.
Of course I do. She deserved that gold.
She was like, so it was at the White.
Still mad about that.
I'm not trying to brag, but it was at the White House. And
you were at that White House.
It was an Asian thing. It was an Asian gathering.
Apparently, I'm not that important for the White House. Okay, that's a little bit showing.
And President Biden like recognized her during his speech and talked about like all her contributions. And I just remember, because we're the same age, and I remember when she came on the scene, I felt like people still do it, you know, but like back in the day, it was like, oh, why is she skating for the U.S. if she's like not American?
Yeah.
You know, all that kind of energy, and you're like, it's just now to be able, felt really proud to be sitting next to her and like thinking like, wow, that she's like a great American, and that felt like a really special moment.
And now she's your peer. You're sitting right next to her.
Well, that's not what I was. No, I was like a fan. I was like, oh,
But that's
Michelle. But I'm just saying, to see all the different kinds of representation, I guess, and that was an important one to see, like in that moment. And I think with To All the Boys, you know, it was really hard to get that movie made. You know, and I think people tend to forget how recent a lot of this like movement is. You know, I think it's only been a few years, honestly.
Yeah.
And now I think there's a much more conversation around it. People have more vocabulary to sort of like talk about it. But I certainly like, you know, coming into publishing, I mean, I've been around for a while, and it's been a lot of times you hear the same thing, which is like, we already have a story about
we have one Asian movie. That's
yeah,
it.
we already have that. So
we only have one.
So we're covered. But I think
we're covered.
but I think I guess my hope is that just the door keeps opening wider, so it doesn't have to be just the one thing. So you don't have the weight of representation on one story to be representing everybody, but to be like, can we just get more going?
Yeah.
You know, so it's a wider sort of like spectrum.
Yeah,
more offerings.
Yeah, so it's not just The Summer I Turned Pretty. There's numerous The Summer I Turned Pretty,
you know,
from different Asian lenses, basically.
For sure,
yes.
because like for instance, To All the Boys was the first like YA New York Times bestseller with an Asian girl on the front of the cover.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
A huge thing.
wild. And,
Yeah.
then the movie ended up being the first teen rom-com with an Asian American girl as a lead. And it's a lot of conversation about firsts, and it would be great to be like not talking about like first at some point.
Yeah.
You know, where it's just like kind of
That's how it
normal.
is.
Yes.
Yeah,
where it's
exactly.
normal. So
Yep. I wish. We're a long way though, but we're almost getting there.
I mean, as a storyteller, I think you can offer like, here's my like little piece of something to offer, and then hopefully like it just, if it does well, then it can show people, hey, like this story is like worth listening to, or people like care about seeing these people on the screen too.
Well, speaking of going from books to film and TV, how is that transition for you writing on your typewriter, solitary, and then now collaborating and working and writing for film or in television. How has that journey been for you? Have you had to break habits? Have you had to put yourself in check?
I mean, I think that like being in a writer's room is really fun because you bounce ideas off of each other. You're getting the benefit of a lot of different experience and like lived experience and point of view, and you're hearing stories like and that you may never have heard, and that's amazing that you can put it all into the show. I think so that's one thing. And then I think show running is a whole different aspect of it, where it's so much of like managerial in a way, and like human resources, and like just like solving problems every day. It's like people just come to
So
you
you're
and,
just
like,
doing everything.
yeah, I mean, it's like you're literally going, okay, how can I like help with this problem? And people just like come up to you all day, and that's really, really different than me in my old life. Maybe I would just go sit in a room and drink my tea and just be with my stories alone, which can be somewhat lonely, but it can also be really nice to just be in your own head. And I think writing with the door closed, which is a very different experience. But with the door closed, meaning it's just you and the story, and you're not really thinking about any of the like audience or what they're gonna say. You can really just think about what you want to say and tell your story that way. And you decide when you invite others into the room.
Yeah.
So I think I love that part of novel writing. But I also love being a part of a group as well.
Well, how do you, I guess, ensure that certain parts or like certain elements of the story stay in the like are in both versions of the story? Like the plot is present in the TV version and also in the book. Like, how do you know what to include and what not to include?
I think,
both?
well, my compass is always like, what do the readers really, really want to see? Then I want to make sure I like serve that to them. That's sort of my guiding compass on that. And you know, and you just know, as an author who's listening to what they say, you know what like they care about, and you know like. I think to me, it's less important what color someone's eyes are. I really don't care about that than it is that you get the same like sort of spirit and vibe from the story, and then the characters feel like really true to the story and authentic. But I think it's always been important to me to listen to what my readers are saying, because I do feel like nobody owes it to you to read your story or watch your show. You know, you gotta like earn that, and then. If it's almost democratic in that way, so it's part like for your pleasure and part to provide something that people want to read. So I try to balance it like with the things I care about, and then also thinking about what they want to see from me. And with Summer I Turned Pretty, it's been so many years since the books came out that I do know like which scenes resonate with people and what they'll want to see, and so I try. Wherever I can. But I think of this as like a reimagining in many ways as well, because I'm writing it. It's coming out in 2022.
Yeah.
So like feeling like here are places that I want to like have a fresh look, or really thinking about it like if I wrote this story today.
Yeah.
These characters would be the same, but here they are in a different situation, and who would they be 13 years from now? You know, so that's how I approach adaptation.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to ask about. You know, you wrote this a while back, and then did you have to update anything, or you know? But you pretty much answered. Like, did you kind of struggle with that, where you're like, "Oh, should I include the pandemic?" I don't know if the pandemic on your book, but like,
Story is aspirational. I don't think anybody wants to like.
No, but it's like, should you include certain things that kind of are time markers compared to like?
I mean, it's always it's a sort of question I think that YA authors specifically have grappled with for a long time, because, you know, and for years, because you're going, do I want to reference like a certain song or a certain like movie star or whatever? Because it will definitely date you immediately, or if you use any kind of slang, the book's not coming out for a year at the earliest. But you want it to still feel young and like relevant. I try to think of it like a classic in a classic way, and so I will include a reference where if I feel like it's standing the test of time, or I'll be very specific to when it's coming out. Like with To All the Boys, in my mind it was very specifically what year it was.
Yeah.
So I did have certain references to things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just so interesting to kind of hear that journey of knowing what to include. Just because I've watched the films and it's just, there's something so classic about all your stories, but it's so modern. Like you play with these tropes that we're used to seeing in rom-coms.
Well, that's the thing. Okay,
Yeah.
but you can never. It's almost like you can never win a race against like technology. You're gonna try and buy the latest iPhone, and then like in 6 months there's gonna be a new one. So you really can't stay ahead of that.
I still have an iPhone 8.
Oh.
Yep. There's not even an iPhone 8. Anyway, sorry, go on.
So I think if To All the Boys feels like, if it feels modern or relevant or like fresh or like right now, I mean, I think in a couple of years there's always going to be something like culture moves so fast these days too that, but I think it's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's important to sort of enjoy something in the moment for what it is and still be able to have love for it even as time goes, where you might say like, oh, this thing's problematic or that thing is like, like I wish it was differently, but in the moment it is one thing, and then you just hope that there continues to be progression.
Yeah.
And that there continues to be like new stories that like we move so fast these days, so you can't like ever stay ahead of that. But I think you present what you think is like your best work, and that you feels like genuine or truthful to a moment, and then you go on to make the next thing.
Yeah. And as we have heard, Publishers Weekly coined the Han effect once they realized that many agents were looking for sharply written rom-coms. I don't know if that's coded language for Asian, but how did it feel to be acknowledged for creating this certain specific category in this genre?
I mean, I don't think I created a sharply written rom-com. I think I'm
Jenny Han, the responsible for the sharply written rom-com.
I'm happy to be in that company. I'm happy to like have that compliment. It's really lovely. If I think there are so many people, in the rom-com space writing like sharp stuff. I think there was a bit of a drought in terms of what I think maybe gatekeepers thought people would or would not want to see, and I think because in the 90s and like early 2000s there were like so many rom-coms, and you could go to the theater and you can see and enjoy, and it was really just like a nice slice of life thing. It didn't have to have like a superhero attached to it, or like some sort of big like doomsday aspect to it, or even like a huge celebrity. You could see smaller stuff, and I think now a lot of that space is in more on TV, I guess. Like the rom-com people are still out there. It's just kind of like, where are you gonna go to like find what you want? So yeah, because when I think about some of the best rom-coms I've seen, and rom-com, gosh, it's terminology that like is used to like encompass so much. They'll put like they'll call something a rom-com where it's about like somebody like dying.
Yeah,
like,
they're like, oh my god,
but there's romance in it, so it's a rom-com. No, I think it's just we've lost some of that like language for it, but I think we're still here. The audience still wants to see that stuff.
Yeah.
And my audience, I think, are readers who will hopefully also want to watch the show.
Yeah. I think you mentioned Judy Blume earlier, and then you mentioned that there was kind of this gap of like no rom-coms or no kind of these stories that you're telling, and I'm so glad you brought up Judy Blume, because I do feel that you're bringing that energy back, but also kind of making it more 21st century. But because I used to read those books as well, and I feel like you give me that energy.
Oh wow, that's a huge compliment.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying that because we're on TV or on we're being filmed. I'm just saying that for real.
Well, it's interesting with Judy Blume, because I grew up reading her books, and I think like she really hit on something for like many generations of kids read and enjoyed those books. And I think I remember with Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. There's this whole thing about sanitary napkins and belts or whatever it was called, like and like whatever. And I didn't grow up. We had wings, but like we didn't have like a belt. But I think
you said wings.
We had wings.
Come on, wings.
But I think I remember hearing when she was updating things of if she was going to keep the belt thing or what she was going to do, or like, and that's always a question about. To me, hey, I didn't have a problem I'm like, okay, sure, she's wearing a belt. Like, I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't have the internet. But now people can just go on the internet if they don't know what something means and look it up. But I do think it's important to try to like capture a moment in time, and that's what when that book came out was, I think, in the 70s, and that's what the culture was at that moment. So it's something I gave a lot of thought to with Summer I Turned Pretty about like what I wanted to update in terms of the show and like what I wanted to like, maintain.
Yeah, it feels classic, but it's modern.
Well, I hope people watch it and feel, because you said you were feeling like Summer feels nostalgic.
Yeah.
And
I got really excited. Yeah. But no, yeah, it feels like when I see these characters, it's like, yeah, I'd never had a house where they located? They had that big house.
It's fictional. It's called Cousins Beach.
Yeah, Cousins Beach. I was like, who's cousin? But yeah.
Yeah, Cousins Beach, which is sort of like a mashup of a lot of different beaches.
Yeah, and I've never had a house, but I know that feeling of like being away for the summer and, you know, all that good stuff. So it captures a vibe, definitely.
Its own time and place in a way. Summer is, I think. And I was when I was writing the show, I was like, I really want it to feel fresh, but also nostalgic in the sense of like a memory that you would be like remembering how it felt to be, you know, young and like having a huge crush and feeling really inadequate in a lot of ways and like, you know, finding your way.
Yeah.
It's really about like finding your way. And I think Summer lets people sort of like go off and do their own thing for a moment. I remember in high school, people would come back and they would look really different, or they would have gone somewhere different and they have all these like, you know, new experiences. And it was a time sort of almost like its own squared off time.
It was recently announced that you're expanding your relationship with Amazon Studios through the aforementioned overall television and film deal. Applause. You watched that, I did that. What excites you most about this deal? And can you give us a tease of what to expect or what you hope to accomplish? Just tell us everything you plan.
I hope to, you know, keep writing and telling stories about like coming of age, but at any age.
Yeah.
You know, I think people are constantly coming of age and constantly evolving and growing. So it's not just for like one moment in your time. Hopefully your whole life is like a progression. So those are the kind of stories that I want to tell and support, and you know, support new voices. And I have a lot of stories in me though too. So it's like, for me, the biggest challenge is figuring out, is this story best served as like a book, or is it like a movie? Is it a TV show? Like what is it? And that's, I think, challenge one for me, is figuring that part of it out. But I've been like so happy working with Amazon. I'm not just saying it because I'm at an Amazon thing. I would say it wherever I was. Because I've had such a great creative like experience here. And I think that it's nice to be working with people who are supportive, but they also, like, I think, really respect and care about what young people want and think and want to serve that audience, because I think it's an important, smart audience. I want to continue to tell stories about young people, but also other stuff is cooking too. I will always like be, I think, in I don't want to say always, because I think, you know what, I like to leave possibilities open for myself as a storyteller, but I do like stories with some romance in them. So I think that's probably going to be a constant for me. Even if it was a story, like a movie about a war.
Yeah,
there's going to be something.
Romance. There'll be a
always
romance
gonna be something,
in the war.
because that's what I care about the most. Like, you know, I loved, like, for instance, I love the Hunger Games. But like, what I really care about is like what's going on with PETA. That's what I like all the dystopian, all the like political stuff is great. But I'm also like,
with Katniss and PETA.
Yeah, and Gail, like, what's happening over there? And the stories that, like, I think if you just think about life and what's really important to people, and like when you die, probably what you remember, and you think about all the people that you loved, and your relationships that you've had, be it like romantic love or stories about women, or I'll probably be like focused on that just because I'm interested in that. That's why I like to try to make the stuff that I want to see.
Yeah, what, like, I ask this to a lot of like creators and writers, but when do you know a story is worth telling?
That is never like a question that I really ask myself.
Okay.
Because I feel like if I'm telling it, then it feels worth it.
You just annihilated my question. Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good question. I will no longer ask that to people. Okay, so, in the future, what are some things you'd like to see in Asians in film and literature and TV and just like in entertainment? What do you hope to see with the Asian diaspora?
I hope to see just more and different. I think I would love to see more like South Asian. I would like to see more like queer Asian, just like getting...
And Filipino?
Yeah, Filipino. Like there's a lot of different kinds of Asian out there. It's kind of wild that we have like this one moniker for everybody, but it's like a huge diaspora. So I think just getting more variety of things and things I never even like dreamt of or places I've never been. I'm curious to see that.
Going back to kind of like what's in the future for you, can we expect you just to kind of do a 180 and do something very dark and depressing?
Maybe. No, probably
horror?
not. Well,
a musical? Is a musical in your future?
Would love that, but depressing is you're probably not gonna see
Yeah.
from me. I think, people often ask me what is the difference between YA and adult. And to me, there's only one difference, which is I think that books for young people have a hopeful ending. And I don't think I've ever read a book for a young person that felt hopeless in the end. And I think it's because you're thinking about your audience and really caring about them and wanting them to be okay. And I wouldn't ever want to tell a story that in the end people walk away feeling like there's no hope in the world. I think as an adult author writing for adults, then there's less responsibility in that because people can choose for themselves like what they're gonna read and how they're gonna respond to that. But with young people, I want them to always have hope, and so I think my stories will tend to have some sort of hope in the end. So depressing, probably not like
Not
at
here.
points, perhaps sadness at points,
Yeah.
but ultimately I like a warm-hearted
Nice
story.
And we have enough depressing stuff, so.
Other people can do that. Like, I'll watch it.
Yeah.
But for me, what I like is something that feels like hopeful in the end.
And one last question, what role do you aim to play in seeing an increase in representation and bridging the community, not just within like the greater community, but within our own community too?
I think, continuing to tell like inclusive stories where, you have a wide and diverse group. And I think, I try to do the best I can do. And I think it's like, part of it is creating opportunities for people and then also hoping that the story I tell then can open the door wider for someone else's story with whatever diversity they're bringing to the table, because it's not possible, I think, to serve every single group in every single story. So it's just kind of making like good faith efforts in the story that you're telling. And I always seek to write authentically and tell sincere stories, so I think, I think everyone can always do better too. And it's just really about the pursuit of doing better and trying your best.
Well, Jenny, I am so excited for you, what you have in store, and we're excited for The Summer I Turned Pretty, coming out on Prime Video, June 17th. So excited. I'm so excited for all y'all to see it. Tweet me your reactions. But thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Amazon.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the great information you shared and for educating us on this topic. This is really great information that we all need in order to move forward and think about how we better support and uplift the API community. I want to thank the entire CAPE organization in all of the work that you're doing. If you're interested in learning more about the work that CAPE is doing and about API representation across television and film in Hollywood, I encourage you all to visit capeusa.org. As you know, the goal here is equity and inclusivity. But we have to know where we started, where we are today, in order for us to get better for tomorrow. Just think, if we all do our part, next year we will not only see an increase in the numbers, but we'll see better representation and more authentic stories from the API community across television and film. I know that we're committed to doing our part here in Amazon Studios. As we close out today, I want to encourage you to think about a couple questions. The first one is, ask yourself, what am I doing to uplift and support my own community? Then ask yourself, how am I using my voice, my privilege, and my power to uplift other communities? And lastly, what am I doing to ensure we protect the rights of everyone? Listen, we're not here today to only tell stories, although we love doing that, but we're here also to build community. So I want to thank you for being a part of our community. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We encourage you to come back for more, whether in person or online. And we hope today that you learned something and that you feel empowered to go out and do something and make a difference. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.